Welcome to the Generation Kids Daily Devo podcast, where we move from wonder to worship, looking for God at work in the world around us, ready to ask the tough questions and discover what His Word has to say to us. Today's episode is titled, What Are We Actually Talking About? And it comes from me, Casey Taylor. I don't know where you're from, but here in Texas, our summers are more than just a little hot. In fact, it might be better to think of Texas heat as whatever the step up from hot might be, assuming every other state has what they think of as hot. Texas summers, I promise you, are hotter. And even though we too had video games that we could have sat home and played just like a lot of kids do today, the times were a little bit different. And generally, our parents pushed us outside for most of the day. And honestly, it was pretty great. We would play football for an hour and then get tired of that and move on to baseball or roller hockey or basketball. Or we'd go find some wooded areas and build a fort and use our imagination to create all sorts of fun and entertaining scenarios that we could act out. Until it got dark or we got hungry, and then we'd leave a trail of sweat all the way home after a long, hot, and exhausting day outside in the Texas summer heat. But one of the things I used to look forward to was the days when I'd find enough money, usually a little more than a quarter, to go to the gas station and buy a huge Coca-Cola or Dr. Pepper and down it. I'd be so thirsty that I'd just keep drinking and keep drinking. And I used to think it was just because it was so good, and that burn, man, I love that carbonation burn as it goes down cold. But I would come to learn that one of the interesting things about sodas is that they don't and can't actually quench your thirst. They're great to taste and enjoy on a cold day, but because of the caffeine, especially in large quantities like the size I used to drink, they can't actually satisfy your thirst because it is what nutritionists call a diuretic, which means that it's actually drying you out even more than you might already be, even if it does keep your mouth from literally being dry. So it can be a good thing, just not the good thing that your body is craving. It's not the thing your body actually needs. When we're used to something, we can mistake it for a good thing, even if it's not the thing that will bring us true life. This was the case for the Israelites after they were freed from the bondage of serving and being enslaved in Egypt. As Moses led them out into the wilderness, God provided what the Bible calls manna, which is literally translated into, what is it? Which was definitely the question the Israelites were asking when it just showed up out of nowhere every day looking like frost on the ground.
What's that?
God told them to trust Him for provision, that He'd take care of them as they left Egypt. But you know what they did? They got so frustrated that it didn't taste like the food that they had when they were in captivity. The spices of Egypt, or the meats and carbs that they were used to, this manna just wasn't as enjoyable to them. They longed for meat, but He gave them manna.
Come on!
Why did He do this? Couldn't He have just thrown them a steak or two here and there? Well, let's look at what God said to them.
And He humbled you, and let you hunger, and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that He might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Deuteronomy 8:3.
Did you catch that? It was never about meat or no meat, manna or no manna. It wasn't like when your parents want you to eat your veggies when you'd rather eat mac and cheese. He gave them manna to teach them to trust in Him. He wanted them to believe and put faith in His words to them, to learn to trust Him and to trust in Him. I'm sure God knew that there were tastier foods He could have left with them, but sometimes God has to remind us that His ways for us are better than our ways for ourselves. If the Israelites could learn to not just hear, but really listen and follow God's ways, His commandments and His instructions, then they would have what He really wanted them to have: true life, a lasting life. That isn't about momentary pleasures. It can be really easy to become focused on what we think might satisfy us in a moment, but God is ultimately interested in what will satisfy us forever. And that is His Word, which is alive and active, constantly revealing new things to us, constantly changing us as we believe and trust in what God shows us through it. God doesn't want us not to have a good thing. He just wants us to trust Him for a better, truly satisfying thing. Soda is good to the taste, but water will literally revitalize our bodies and quench our thirst. The world will offer us fun things to think about and fun distractions like movies, TV, music, video games, or any number of other fun things. But when we make room in our lives to read God's Word, our souls will start to come alive, because that's how we were designed. My hope for you, my friends, is that we learn to make space to read God's Word and to give Him our attention throughout our days, so that while we can still enjoy the wonderful taste that the world has to offer, that the thirst of our souls might be quenched by the water of the Word, and that we might learn to hunger for the only thing that can truly satisfy us, which is the truth and knowledge of God through His Word. Now it's time for
Today's Big Question!
Today's big question is, what would be the hardest thing for you to give up if it meant hearing God more clearly by removing that thing from your life? Would you be willing to give up a good thing for a better thing? Thanks for listening to the Generation Kids Daily Devo podcast. If you want to keep in touch with us on all our social media platforms, check out the links in the description. And if you'd like to help support us as we continue to create meaningful content for kids of all generations, please subscribe to our Patreon by visiting us at patreon.com/wearegenerationkids.